Said, I am Theresa Badurek, and I'm the urban horticulture agent here at Extension. My job is just to extend the information from the University of Florida to everyone here in Pinellas County. And my focus is mainly on sustainable gardening practices. And today I've been asked to talk about how to save all kinds of things in the landscape, but we're going to talk a lot about money savings, but there's other things, of course, that we save. Uh, we're using the Florida-friendly landscaping practices as a lens to step through these. So I don't know how many of you have ever taken a Florida-friendly landscaping class, but there are 9 principles that guide us in how to design, plant, and maintain a garden using those principles. So I'm going to walk through those, and then we're going to talk about how each of those can bring you savings in your landscape. So a lot of the time we focus on saving things like protecting our water, right? And protecting water quality, reducing pesticide use, and protecting our ecosystems and our wildlife. And all of those things are very, very important. But I also want to take the opportunity to talk about how you, as a human being who has to manage a landscape or a garden, can save your own resources, right? While also helping the environment. So we're going to talk about ways that we can apply these things to also save your money, your energy, your time, your water. And a lot of it, again, is going to focus back on money because we can quantify that. But I also want you to be mindful as we walk through this that your time is super valuable. I don't have to tell you that. You know your time is really valuable, but it's hard to put a number on that. It's not as simple as saying, well, my salary works out to this hourly rate, so that's my time. But honestly, a lot of us feel like our personal time is more valuable than that. So that's something that is harder to quantify, and we may not be able to, but it's important. So teaching you to save time, maintaining the landscape is also a focus. So what can we do? We're going to use the Florida-friendly practices, and then again, think of looking at your landscape in ways where you can save. There's one thing that I can drill this down to, and that is less is more. So in a landscape, the more things you do in your landscape, the more things you're going to need to do to maintain it. So when we start reducing our applications of things, reducing our high maintenance practices, we're going to start reducing time and money, which for most of us is really important. Budgets are tight. This is super important now. The Florida Friendly program is, again, it's really out there to help protect Florida's environment, which is inherently a savings, right? When we damage the environment, that becomes an expense and a time drain on our entire state and economy. And how can we bring this down to you? So, number one, and the most important principle of Florida Friendly is right plant, right place. And that just means picking those plants that are suited to your specific location. Soil type, pH, water, drainage, whether it's sunny or shady, like those kind of things. You absolutely have to pick the plant that suits that environment. If you don't pick a plant that suits an environment, it's either not going to live or you're going to need to constantly fertilize it, water it, and spend all that extra time and money on it. And that's what we want to avoid. And so when we're thinking about right plant, right place, I just pulled up a couple of examples of plants from a 30-gallon live oak, which is still a really small tree overall. That's nearly $300. And so if you put that in the wrong place and it doesn't survive, you've lost $300. With a tree, if you plant that in the wrong place, like let's say you plant a tree that's meant to get 75 feet wide and you plant it 10 feet away from the foundation of your house, then not only have you, it's the cost of the tree, but you have to think about the cost of damage to your property from the tree lifting the foundation or the roots being in your plumbing, or, all the way down to tree removal. So that you need to make sure you're picking the right plant in the right place so that its entire life cycle will be successful and you won't have to replace it and it won't cause expense. And so even all the way down to just buying a new shrub, like the very popular landscape plant, the Yaupon holly pictured on the bottom right. Buying a 3-gallon Yaupon holly, it's only $17. But that hedge in the picture of Yaupon holly, that is probably at least 5 years of growth. And probably 7, 8 plants. And so if you started picking the wrong plant for that place, you're going to have to replace it. That's a couple $100 worth of plants. And we'll talk about some other impacts. So going back to the site conditions and the design considerations, what isn't listed here is more of the design part, and that is to make sure that you plan for the mature size of the plant, right? So the right plant, the right place, it's going to be happy there, and then you have room for it. And that oak tree is a really good example, but even something like, we're going to go back to the picture with some price comparisons, even something like that Yopon holly, and in this case, it's a dwarf Yopon holly that I chose because they stay smaller, but they still want to be about 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide. That's their natural growth habit. So would you plant that 1 foot away from your house as a foundation planting? Probably not, because it's eventually going to constantly grow into the wall of your house, which means you're constantly going to have to prune it, which is your time. And over pruning it is going to make the plant unhealthy, which means you're going to maybe want to treat it with something, or you're going to have to replace it. And so when you're looking at that right plant and you've picked it, now you have to fast forward in time to when the plant is fully grown and make sure there's going to be room for it. So these are really important things to consider. The second principle is to water efficiently. This one's like the most obvious and kind of somewhat easy to quantify one, because we all get a water bill and we know how much it costs. And we can do things really easily and quickly to save water. So one thing we can do for sure is to use a rain gauge. So get yourself a rain gauge and measure how much rain actually falls in your landscape. We all know how Florida is. Your neighbor across the street can be getting an absolute downpour of rain and you can get nothing, or vice versa. If we water our landscape, if we have like a mixed landscape with some turf grass and some shrubs, most of the time that mixed landscape of mature plants, a general rule of thumb is that it needs about 3/4 of an inch of water in a week. And that should only be applied if there's no rain and if you see the plants wilting. So automatic irrigation systems, the easiest way to save money is to turn off the automated irrigation system and let your default setting be off. And obviously, if you're going to be gone for long periods of time, you may need to adjust that. But when you're home, regularly home, keep it turned to off. And then when it's your day to water, then you make sure if it hasn't watered and you're seeing signs of wilt, that you turn it on to water that one day. And this will help prevent you from watering during a rain event or just over applying water. If it rained enough that week and you saw that in a rain gauge, then you don't have to turn it on. And so you'll see some immediate savings right there. Another thing you can do is to calibrate your sprinkler system. And all that means is for you to go around and measure how much water each of those zones is putting out. And you could do this at home with tuna fish cans or cat food cans, any sort of flat bottom, straight side cans. And you want to, each zone is measured differently. So you go to each zone and you put 8 to 10 of these cans out, right? Then you turn on the irrigation for that zone. And I usually say run it for 15 minutes. And then you measure the average depth of water in all those cups. So if we did that and we had an example zone and it puts out a 1/4 inch of water in 15 minutes, and I need 3/4 of an inch that week because we didn't have any rain, that means that zone would have to run 45 minutes when I run it. So now I know, zone A or whichever zone I tested needs to be set at 45 minutes. Then you repeat that process for each zone because they may have a different distribution pattern and timing. And so you can do that, and that's an easy way to save money because you may have it set to put out too little water, which actually can be sometimes detrimental to plants, or you could have it putting out entirely too much water. And the other thing to do is to make sure that you're watering. The goal for mature plants and turf grass, including St. Augustine, is if it doesn't rain, that you water once a week in the morning. And here's an example of how that's going to save you a bunch of money. We have some water and sewer rates. This is for unincorporated county, so I know it's going to vary where you live because some of us have city water supplies, and some of us, we have all different things. These are the costs right now. So the first 1,000 gallons, I'm sorry, for the first 4,000 gallons, we pay $3.93 for 1,000 gallons. When you go over that 4,000 gallon usage, then you pay $8.94 for every 1,000 gallons. And then just to give you an idea of how much water an irrigation event takes, this bottom is a calculation of an average suburban lot. So one irrigation cycle uses about 991 gallons of water. So that's almost that first example right there. But that's equal to running a bathroom sink for like over 8 hours, or flushing an old toilet almost 200 times. You can read all of these. Running your dishwasher 50 times. I mean, if you run your dishwasher every single day of the month, that's still only 30 times. You irrigate once, and now you're running your dishwasher 50 more times. So making these changes, you should see a pretty immediate drop in your water bill. Unless you're just using copious amounts of money elsewhere indoors, which I hope you're not. But we can see this happen really, really quickly and easily. Some of you might be thinking, well, I use reclaimed water. Well, that has a cost too. It's a lower cost. The price of the reclaimed water is cheaper, but it's not nothing. And then you also have to think about, some people go, oh, well, I'm using well water, and so I don't pay for that water. And that is true, but that is connected to all the other water. And there's two things. If we overuse our well water, we can get saltwater intrusion, which would render your well essentially useless for irrigation. So then you've lost the well entirely. And well maintenance is a cost on top of all that. So there is no free water. And so using as little as possible, super important. Also, when we overwater, we get fungal disease in our plants. And that becomes very, very expensive. I can use one quick example. In St. Augustine turfgrass, one of the most common diseases that we have right now in countywide is a fungal disease called take-all root rot. And it is by far encouraged by overwatering. And it will kill turfgrass quickly. And if you catch it in time, you might be able to prevent its spread by applying a monthly fungicide during every rainy season, like potentially for years. And that price is going to add up, not to mention the environmental, consequences of having to apply a chemical all the time. So you can save a ton of water and save a ton of money with those couple of changes. Fertilizing appropriately is number 3. Number 1 thing to think about with fertilizer is most of our landscape plants, most of our mature shrubs and trees in the landscape do not need to be fertilized. It is just not necessary. Now, if we're growing fruits and vegetables, that is a different story. Then those often require a little bit more fertilization. And sometimes some turf grasses, if maybe they weren't put in the best soil, right pH, they may require some minor fertilizations. So first you have to ask, do I really need to fertilize? That's an important question. Soil testing, we don't do it here in county, but if you want to reach out to me, if you want a soil test, I can send you the submission form, and they get mailed to the University of Florida. We can find out your soil test and nutrients, so we can find out, do we need to fertilize, and how much. That's the really important thing. So if you've determined that you need to fertilize something, it's important that you read the bag of fertilizer and actually do the math. There's calculations. Most of the bags will tell you need this much per this many square feet or this much bed space. And so you need to read that bag and do it appropriately. So you'll actually save a lot of money because you won't be buying too much fertilizer. The bags themselves can be really expensive. And then also you won't be wasting what you bought. So that bag or that container will last you longer. So read the bag, use slow release fertilizers. That just means that they just slowly release the nutrients over time. Using compost can really help. The soil, just improve the soil, and it will help hold the nutrients better, and it does contain some nutrients. Make sure you're keeping fertilizer away from the water. We're going to talk more about that later, so I'm going to skip that part. And keep your fertilizer off hard surfaces. So as we fertilize when we're near sidewalks and driveways and roads, you need to make sure there's deflectors that go on these fertilizer spreaders make sure that you have that deflector on the side facing that hardscape so that you're not putting fertilizer into the hardscape. And then if you do, when you're done, you just need to simply go and sweep that off the hard, concrete or what have you, back into the landscape. And just to remember that Pinellas County has a fertilizer ordinance. If anybody wants to go to the website, that's what that QR code there with the cute little Google dinosaur will take you to. You can scan that and it'll take you right to the page on the fertilizer ordinance. You can save a ton of money by not violating that because that comes with fines if you fertilize inappropriately. And it also affects all of us in another way. When we over fertilize, it can contribute to algae blooms, which, as you guys know, are nasty and expensive. You know, they damage the environment, and all of us, county and statewide, end up paying through tax dollars for these fixes and these upgrades and these programs to reduce that and to clean up the water. So we're all kind of paying for that in ways that are harder to quantify at the individual level, but we do pay through our taxes and through the work that we do. And so it's important that we don't let our fertilizer get into that water because we'll save a bunch of money. Now, you'll also just save money by not using so much fertilizer. There's just two examples, and all the pictures I have in here, these are not endorsements of any products whatsoever. They are simply like screen grabs to show you how much these things cost. These are from this week, and so this is what it costs to fertilize. So you can save that money. If you didn't need any lawn fertilizer, if your lawn is green and healthy and nothing's wrong with it, you do not need to fertilize it. So you could save $24 by just not buying it and not doing it. Mulch is number 4. So how can I save money with mulch? Well, the county has free mulch. That's a great way. But it's broader than that because mulch helps do all these things that you see written here. So it helps us to keep weeds down. That's a big one. UF did a study and found that properly mulching planted beds like this is as effective as using herbicides to kill weeds. So it works just as well, and it takes about the same amount of time whether you're reapplying the mulch or you're walking around and spraying the herbicide. And so it's a wash. So I would pick the free mulch that has no chemicals and doesn't cost me anything over having to buy a chemical that is number one expensive and may have other effects in the landscape or on me. And so does a lot of wonderful things for the soil, which improves our plant health. If we improve our plant health, it means we don't have to buy more plants. And plants can be expensive, right? So if we're not hurting our plants and they're staying healthier, then that's how mulch can save us some money. This is just an example of, again, the Yopon holly, a very popular shrub. If I didn't take care of my plants appropriately, then I might have to replace those. And an example of an herbicide over here that is $27. That may not seem like a lot of money, but how often would you have to buy that versus applying the free mulch and the occasional whole little weed as it pops up? So that's a direct savings right there. And again, we're not even extrapolating the eventual savings on the environment. This is direct to you, to your pocketbook in a more immediate sense. The environmental benefits are numerous and much harder to quantify. The fifth Florida-friendly principle is attract wildlife. And I know you're thinking, how on earth would attracting wildlife save me money? There's a few different ways. So the things that we do to attract wildlife would be to provide food for them and water and reduce insecticide use. Those are like, if you could do those things, that would be ideal and you don't have to do anything else. If you want to take it to a design level where you're laying out your landscape and encouraging, especially birds and other critters that might be in suburban landscapes, is the best thing you can do is to layer different plant heights and sizes. So think of taller plants and understory small trees. The worst thing you can do for wildlife would just be flat turf grass and a tree. There would be nowhere for them to hide, very few places to nest, very few flowers for nectar. And so even if all you remember is just really varied sizes and heights, because that's going to give all these different opportunities. Some birds like to nest only in certain types of really dense shrubs. And some birds actually only like to nest at certain heights. Like maybe they'll only build their nest between 4 and 6 feet off the ground. So if you didn't have an understory plant that was that height, it would reduce the opportunity for them. So that's a good thing to remember. But again, because we're talking about how am I saving you money right now, if I plant things that encourage the birds that naturally have the berries that they want to eat, that naturally have the seeds that are part of their diet, then I would save $17 on bird food, and that's only 20 pounds. That'll go fast. And I could buy this lovely copper rust bird feeder for $25. So that's an immediate savings. I don't need to buy those because I have grown by planting plants that birds like. I have grown the food for them. And then you're probably wondering, why does she have a picture of neem oil here? So neem oil is it's like an insecticide. It's natural. It comes from a plant. It's a very common insecticide that a lot of gardeners use who want to stay organic. Wonderful. And it can be useful when it's needed. But what happens in a landscape when we're trying to encourage our little buggy guys and our little bird friends is that even organic pesticides will kill the insects because they're designed to kill insects. And if we kill off a lot of the insects, good, bad, otherwise, then that is less food for the birds. We've got to have insects in our landscape. And so if you skip buying the insecticide and just let them be, let there be insects in the landscape to be food, you will attract the birds. And at that point, you'll have some insects, you'll have some birds, and they will generally keep each other at equilibrium so that you shouldn't have as many infestations. And then we would save buying that neem oil only if we had a particular outbreak of, a horrible infestation of something that, the birds and the good bugs weren't keeping up with. So you can save, what is that, 50, $60 just by focusing on attracting wildlife. The next one is kind of tied in with that last one, which is because yard pests or yard insects are wildlife too. And so the next one is about managing yard pests responsibly. And so that mentality of tolerating insects in the landscape is really important here. So only 1%, it's actually technically less than 1%. Less than 1% of insects on the planet are pests. So 99 point whatever percent of insects on the whole planet are either beneficial or they're just not bothering anybody. They're just minding their own business, not hurting anything. So keep that in mind. And usually when I see insects in the garden, I'm doing is observing. I'm just watching to see if it's a good bug or a bad bug. And if it is a bad bug, are the good bugs and birds and such helping to control it? So how do we avoid these pest problems? How do we apply this? How do we manage this, right? So number one, we want to keep your plants healthy. So it starts back with right plant, right place. We've picked the right plant that's going to thrive in our environment. We have not watered it too much. We have not over fertilized, and we keep the plant healthy because a stressed plant is going to be the first plant that succumbs to insects. And I'll tell you, plants are amazing and we learn more about them all the time. Plants actually respond to pests, oftentimes by creating chemicals that repel them or can kill them, even depending on the plant. Most of them are repellents to the insect. And so if we keep a plant healthy, it's going to be able to do that. And so it's going to be able to fight off an infestation better. If the plant is sickly, if the plant is stressed or has a fungal disease, and then along comes a pest that normally could have tolerated, it won't, and it will die. And now we're talking about maybe you had to buy a pesticide, which you spent money on, and now at some point eventually you may have to buy a new plant. And that's also an expense. Make sure when you're buying plants that they're healthy to begin with, also when you bring them home. And that includes not having an insect infestation, but also disease free. And so a quick inspection of the nursery to make sure that it looks good is great. You can also always ask us, take a picture and send it to us, and we can help guide you on what's going on. And looking for pests early, this is an important job. This will take some of your time, which again, you have to quantify what that's worth to you, but can save money. The idea is that you walk around the garden periodically and you know what everything looks like healthy. So you get to know your plants. How do the plants look when they're healthy? So that when there's something different going on, you notice it. And then you look out for insects and you watch what the insects do. Generally, the good insects are eating other insects or, or just pollinating. The bad bugs are the ones actually causing plant damage. So the bad bugs are the ones chewing on things. Uh, Bearing that in mind, I have a picture of a caterpillar here, and a caterpillar would be considered a pest insect on some plants, right? Like caterpillar on my tomato plants is a pest because you might eat my tomatoes. But a caterpillar on some ornamentals is maybe chewing the leaves up a little, but probably not hurting anything. Caterpillars are excellent high protein sources of food for baby birds. So do I want to do something about the caterpillar on my tomato? Probably. Do I need to do something about some caterpillars munching away on a hibiscus bush? Probably not. Let the birds eat those. So that's something you got to keep in mind. Here's a picture of an example of a good bug. Everybody knows that ladybugs are good bugs, right? I'm sure you've heard this. This guy pictured here is a ladybug or lady beetle larva. It doesn't look like a good bug if you're not familiar with it, but you gotta learn to know what's good. And these guys help eat aphids and all kinds of stuff that can affect your plants. So getting to know what those bugs look like and how they behave is important so that you don't go killing the wrong bugs. Because if you start killing off your ladybug larva, you've literally killed off free pest control, which is a direct savings for you. And again, what does that translate to? We've got that neem oil product here again, that's $12. We've got another product over here that is more of a broad spectrum thing. It's killing off insects and mites and diseases. Thing is $30 for that container. Can you imagine? That's expensive. And even worse, I picked this example of a shrub called snow on the mountain. I picked this one for a reason. Number one, this plant is $50, which is, if you're buying a bunch of these, that's going to add up quickly. But the other thing about this, snowbush is another name for this. It actually commonly gets a caterpillar on it called the snowbush spanworm. It makes the caterpillar grows into a lovely moth. It's very pretty and attractive. But what else will it do? That particular caterpillar will eat this plant, just this plant. So it's not going to eat your other plants. It'll eat your snowbush literally to the ground. To the ground. And then next year they'll come back and eat your snowbush to the ground. And eventually this can stress the plant and kill it. So my recommendation in cases like that, where we have a repeated pest problem, is if they eat your snowbush and you've learned that plant is something that is just susceptible to a nasty pest, don't buy that plant again. Just pick a different kind of plant because it's not the right plant in the right place. And some of you might be thinking, well, I have those and I've had them for 12 years and it's never happened to me. You're lucky. And I hope it never does. But when I talk to people, once these pests, locate their host plant, there's usually an established population. They know and they come back. And so sometimes just pick another plant. Don't replace it with the same thing. Save you a ton of money. We also want to focus on recycling. That's the principle number 7. Obviously, we like recycling because it's good for the environment, right? But it's also good for your pocketbook. So number 1, leave your clippings on the lawn. When you mow, just leave the clippings there. That is free fertilizer. Oh, we just saved fertilizer. Whatever that bag of fertilizer was back a few slides back, we don't have to buy that now. I think it was about $25 for the bag of lawn fertilizer. And you saved your time because all you did was mow and you left the clippings there. Done. How about under a big oak tree? Just leave the leaves there to decompose. That builds up the soil beneath there, and a lot of stuff won't grow anyways under the deep shade under a big tree. And so we call that a self-mulching area. You just let it sit there and you've got free mulch under there. You can tuck a few shade-tolerant plants in between and, fancy it up, zhuzh it up a little bit like some people like, but that's free mulch that just falls there. Other things we can do include, let's say the leaves are falling somewhere that's a turf grass area. You can rake those leaves up and then use them as mulch and put them into the flower beds nearby. That way you're not having to throw away those bags of essentially free mulch. So you can also compost if you want to take it to the next level, compost your yard and your kitchen waste in a compost bin. That's going to be a little investment of your time, but then you don't have to purchase compost. And by using compost, you reduce the need for fertilizer. So over time, you don't need to buy compost and you don't need to buy fertilizer. So this is a big deal. Again, we've got some price comparisons here. So the free mulch one is the one on the left. This is a container of pine straw, which is an excellent mulch. And if you have pine trees in your yard, it is falling from your pine trees, and it may fall in the wrong spot, but just rake it up and move it to where you want it. So that's $17 a container, and I promise you, when you open up that container, you might be a little sad about how little space that will cover. So if you have pines, you have free mulch. The other example I have over here is a bag of organic compost, which is something you could make at home, and that is $20 for that bag. It is 1 cubic foot. It's not a lot. So if you have a big garden, it would be expensive to buy enough compost to really impact the garden. You could make some yourself if you want to, again, put the time in. That one's where you have to decide, what's my time worth? And for some of us, it might make more sense to buy bags of compost. That's okay. But we encourage people to make it themselves if they can. Number 8 in the Florida Friendly Principles is to reduce stormwater runoff. And here's another one where you're going to be like, well, how is that affecting me directly? This one is a little further. This is much more of a community cost effect. So what can we do to reduce our stormwater runoff, which will reduce costs, environmental costs in the community? So number 1 would be using porous surfaces. So that means gravel patios versus solid concrete, or paver patios that allow the rainwater to perk through. You can also retain the water on your site. You can make a rain garden. What you see in this slide there says making swales and berms. That basically, swales would be like dips in the landscape where water can settle, or berms where you're just sort of redirecting it. So rather than having it run straight off down the front yard into the street, you might create some landforms that slow it down. Because as it gets slowed down, it tends to get absorbed into those planter beds, turf grass. And so less of that water ends up in the street, which is better for the community overall, which we're paying for, you know. You can also catch the rain in a rain barrel. Now that's a more direct savings, because now you have, other than the cost of the rain barrel, you have free water that you save from when it rains that you can apply in the drier times in between the rains. That's a direct savings for you. But here's how we save it in the larger sense too. I've got a couple examples here. So the first one, top left, was from, I believe, the city of Turpin. And the monthly bill in that particular city for everyone includes a charge of $10.65 for stormwater fees. That is every month, every citizen in that city, and everybody has a similar, they vary in the cost, but every one of us pays a stormwater fee. And so by reducing our inputs into the stormwater, we're going to try to hopefully we're going to keep those costs as low as possible. And we also have on here, if we go down to the bottom left, that's an example of a county proposed stormwater assessment. And so I chose a random address and just a small, you can see an 8,000 square foot typical suburban lot. It talks about how much the proposed assessment is going to be $133.65 for the year to assess that property for stormwater fees. That's not entirely different if you work it out to a monthly charge than the city one. So you're looking at 10 to 12, $15 a month from everyone, and we're paying that for stormwater. And why are we doing that? Because we're trying to prevent the picture you see on the right, this algae bloom over here, trying to slow down stormwater, keep it in retention ponds. We're trying to prevent pollutants from getting into our actual bodies of water, our bay, the Gulf, lakes, streams, etc. And when we do get those algae blooms, then these things become even more expensive, because as you can imagine, you can't leave it like that. We get fish kills, it affects tourism. And, imagine you live in that condo building right there and you're trying to sell your condo. That's going to affect you economically right away, because how is the real estate agent going to convince someone to buy that property? Well, that's going on. And so there's a number of ways that this affects us financially. So we all want to do things to slow that water down and keep it on our site to prevent that. That also goes back to the fertilizer. Too much fertilizer gets in those storm drains and goes directly out and helps to feed and fuel those algae blooms. And so all of this ties in. I just broke it out this way to organize my thoughts and your digestion of those thoughts. The last principle of Florida-friendly landscaping is to protect the waterfront, which is really important. I mean, it's important everywhere in Florida, but we have a lot of coastal areas here, whether it be a lake shore or Gulf side intercoastal. A lot of people in our county have a water body directly next to their property that they have an opportunity to protect. So the best thing to do is to plant that shoreline area, that interface between the water and the land. The best protection is to have that planted up. We never want to see turf grass, water, because it's not as good at preventing erosion, and water runs off faster, and a lot of those pollutants don't get absorbed and trapped as easily. You also want to keep a 10-foot buffer from the water's edge for any kind of fertilization or chemical applications. And we certainly don't want, if you're mowing, any of those clippings to be blown towards the water. And so this is really important management design stuff that you can do. There's that algae bloom again, just to push that point home. But on the right is an example of, you see a lot of neighborhoods like this where folks have a backyard and they have a seawall, and then it's directly on the intercoastal, or it's directly on the Gulf, what have you. And we recommend, as we mentioned here, at least a 10-foot buffer, at least, right? So you can't apply a fertilizer within 10 feet of water, ever. So you can see in this picture on the right, we've got some lovely grasses, and then we've got mostly turf grass. So we have ornamental grass and turf grass. The ornamental grasses probably don't need to be fertilized, but there's not 10 feet of them, right? That's probably 3 feet-ish. So we can see in this landscape that the last 7 or so feet of that turf grass can never, ever be fertilized. So what if we did end up with a problem with the health of that turf grass and it required more nutrients? The way they've designed this landscape, we can now officially not fix it. We can't provide those extra nutrients to that turf grass ever. I'm going to point something out that's really interesting about that rule about the 10 feet, because you can't apply within 10 feet of the body of water, but you also can apply within 10 feet from the top of the slope. And I'm hoping you guys can see my pointer, because down here by this palm, closer to the water, it's lower. And you can tell by looking at the wall in the background that the land slopes up gently. This is Florida, we don't have big hills usually. The land slopes quite a ways up here. I would say maybe it levels off around here, possibly. So at this point, let's say this is, oops. At this point, in the middle of the wall pictured here, maybe it levels off. At that point, we still have to go another 10 feet away from the water before we can fertilize that backyard, that turf grass, which may be the whole turf grass yard. So just be really mindful of that. If you happen to buy a property, or if you're re-landscaping, maybe you lost your landscape in a hurricane last year, when you're redoing those landscapes, be mindful of that, because again, we don't say that you need to fertilize turf grass all the time, but when you do need to, when there is an issue with it, you don't want to have yourself in this scenario. So ideally, all that space would have been planted with native or low ground covers, or things that would absorb the water and would not need to be fertilized, like turf grass may need to be sometimes. So you can save all kinds of time and money by doing the things that I talked about here. And I just encourage everyone to take that information back and maybe walk around your landscape and think critically about what you can do to save your own money in that space. And I would also just want you guys to remember that the less you do, the less you have to do. So like, I'm almost basically giving you permission to be really lazy in your landscape and spend most of that time, rather than like the fertilizing and the chemicals and all that, like make a cup of coffee or pour a glass of wine or tea or whatever your beverage of choice is, nice cup of cold icy water, and just spend time walking in the landscape, getting to know your landscape. And then also make sure that you guys reach out to us, because we're here to help you with that. So when you have these plant health issues, or like, do I fertilize, or whatever comes up in the landscape, we can help you make better decisions to save money. So I want you to remember that we're here. We've got a super easy email for you all to use to email us. It's just gardenhelp@pinellas.gov. You guys already know the ending of the email. All you have to do is type in gardenhelp@pinellas.gov and send us pictures and questions. We have a help desk, we have a phone number, you can see it all there. So don't hesitate to use us. The QR code you see in the corner is actually an evaluation. It's not to email us. If you would be so kind, if you're inclined to scan that, it will open up a little, like a survey, and you can tell me if you learned something. And just if you have the time, you can scan that now and fill it out when we're done. And I just wanted to wrap it up. I believe we're getting close to time. We are getting close to time. And I want to let you guys know that I'm not jumping off yet if there are questions. So I'm going to open up to questions now. If you have to go, thank you for coming. And don't forget our email address. And that's all for me, unless there are questions. Let me see if there's any questions in our chat box here. I don't think so. Jane, do you see any questions? I'm not seeing any. You can also unmute and just ask. It's not even that many of us, so you don't have to be nervous. Let me see if I can. I'm going to leave that up.
There's a question about, can you get free
Sure.
seed in place of turf grass?
Yep, hang on. I don't know why it was taking such a
There's
long
also
time. Yes. Okay. So I'll start with the first question. The first question was, do you recommend any natural or organic types of fertilizers? So we are not actually permitted to name specific ones like brand names, but I will say that as a general rule, adding compost, like top dressing compost in the garden on the regular, is the best way to do it, because there's very small levels of nutrients. They tend to release them slowly over time, and the risk of burning your plants is like nil. So that's really important. If you go into buying fertilizers, one thing I would recommend is slow release, whether it's organic or synthetic or whatnot. And always check the label on slow release fertilizers. They use technology that encapsulates the nutrients, and it slowly releases it depending on like temperature and moisture. There are actually some that use plastics for that. And so you want to read the bag and make sure you're not seeing plastic listed as an ingredient. There are other ones that use natural sulfur coating, which is something, just a nutrient that breaks down in the environment. So check the bag for that, because we don't want to be putting microplastics down. That's one thing I would certainly say. The next question was, is there anywhere in Pinellas you can get free seed in place of turf grass, like clover seed? And unfortunately, I don't know of a place where you can get anything free like that. I wish I had a better answer. I don't. We occasionally will get donations of seeds to distribute in the community, but those are generally vegetable seeds for community gardens. We've never been given any kind of ground cover seeds. Sadly, that's all I've got for that. Is the free mulch reference the same as available at recycling centers? Yes. So Pinellas County has a free mulch program, and there are pickup locations in different county parks. And I would always encourage people to just Google that, because there'll be updates too. Like sometimes they will be out of mulch because there was a big run on it or whatnot. So before you run over there with a truck and a shovel, I always say, like, refer to the website to see if there's any, because they often post those updates like, oh, this site's out of mulch and we hope to get it back. Check here for when it's back. What do we have next? Next question. My church has a lot of animals. Can I use their manure, or do you have to let it sit for a period of time? Yes, very good question. Fresh manure can burn plants, so you definitely need to age that manure. Depending on what you're using it for, you need to age it further. If we're not talking about edible plants, it needs to be aged by at least 3 months, so 90 days. There's some really specific rules in edible gardens. If it's going to touch any part of the edible parts, like if that manure is going to, like, let's say you have carrots, for example, that are growing, and the food you're going to eat is going to actually directly contact the manures, those have to be aged at least 120 days or more. So that's 4 months. So the answer is yes, you need to age the compost, and then how long depends on your product. Thank you, Becky. You put the mulch pickup link in the chat. I love when people help me with that. Jane, I think this question might be for you. What seeds are in the kit that you offered to send out?
Oh, it is really just like this tiny little paper container with a little bit of with some seeds and a little bit of soil, and you can kind of sprout your own seeds in the little container and then replant them in another one. So we have a variety of herbs. I think we have like basil and marjoram and cilantro.
Cool. Excellent. I wasn't sure what you guys still had because that's probably things that we bought, in the past for herb gardening classes, right?
Yeah, no, this one's like a little, it's really
Oh,
cute. It's like a little container that you open up and you can set up this little thing. It's only about maybe 2 inches big. It's tiny.
mhm.
It's fun.
Yeah, just a little something fun to get you started.
Yeah, you won't be able to eat a whole salad or anything with this little thing.
But sometimes that's enough to get people excited and get started, have a little success with a small plant, and that gets you motivated and excited to plant some more. Great. If there are no other questions, I want you guys to remember the email address, gardenhelp@pinellas.gov. We are standing by to answer your burning plant questions. So, um, other than that, if I'm not seeing any more questions coming through, I want to thank you guys for spending your lunchtime with us and hope to see you again.